In other Gospels, Jesus transfigures before he suffers. In John, he feeds multitudes before he fully encounters his vulnerability on the cross. Both are a situation of being given what you need so as to go without what you think you need. We talk about the multiplication of the loaves as if it's a situation of need and desire fulfillment, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. Shirdi Sai Baba, an Indian saint, said about miracles, I give them what they want so that they'll want what I have. He meant, of course, faith. And in the case of Jesus, I believe miracles were his way of saying, I'm fulfilling your needs and desires now, but later I will ask you from the cross to look at your needs, desires, and vulnerabilities without fulfillment. Instead, the cross would become a mirror in which we'd see our vulnerabilities as wounds left open. That'll give rise to discerning created needs or desires we confuse with needs, and the confusion around the energy of egoic compulsion begetting addiction, and the energetic impulse towards spirit that nets serenity. Psychologically, we're in a fairly broken situation, but the answer to broken thinking is not more thinking. Today, tomorrow, and the next day, we're taking our liabilities, learning how to use the energy they contain for strength building. It's the dishonest wealth that other gospels speak of which the teacher asks, if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? Jesus is teaching a huge crowd of 5,000. But remember, there are no others, only mirrors of ourselves. So when the gospel refers to 5,000 hungry people, we become attuned to the 5,000 ways we ourselves are undernourished. We see the apostles who are busy worrying about how to feed them, and we become attuned to how useless worry as a mental tool really is. Now, we possess a certain amount of skill that's come from our survival strategies. To wax autobiographical, being a little OCD, being faced in early childhood with crises for which words were insufficient, these made me personally into a dude who chooses his words really carefully. On the more beautiful end, that's highly exquisite. On the darker end, I have a real hard time sitting down and shutting up. But the wages of ego, our defense mechanisms, are insufficient to meet our own needs. Mother Teresa couldn't take any spiritual nourishment from the words she spoke to her novices. My own paradox, I'm a words guy who longs for silence, is kind of similar. For the apostles, as for us all, suffice to say worry is useless, ego's wages are insufficient, and there are 5,000 different needs to suffice. This, my friends, is a tight spot if ever there was one. And all Jesus asks practitioners to do is make them sit down. In other words, make your needs, your desires, your egoic strategies for meeting them, make them sit down. Before that sounds simple, we have to realize how long it took 12 dudes to get 5,000 seated and attentive, and have compassion on ourselves for how long it's taking us. It's hard to get to know the difference between desires and needs, to get the desires to sit down, and rendering them attentive to Jesus. That's what we ought to do anyway. The ego's unjustified in expecting fanfare. But being acquainted with the fine distinctions between pride and humility, wants and needs, lower self and higher self, it's a big job. And if any of us can do it just a little bit daily, with even a trace of genuine compassion for self and others, we're to be sincerely, humbly, quietly congratulated, as long as we understand that accomplishment is a commission, not an excuse. It's better to watch Jesus. Jesus could have worried, used his ego to fish around for solutions. Instead, he found the most childlike figure in the crowd, as we're to find the most awe-inspired impulses in ourselves. It's important to say Jesus wasn't a playground bully running a steal your lunch money racket. He drew near the kid, chatted him up, And this next bit is important. He waited for the kid to feel naturally impelled to share his lunch. I can't imagine the presence Jesus would need, first to muster it all, then defend from worry and striving, to be able to go hang out with a kid while 5,000 adults are clamoring for nourishment. Childlike awe, though, is fairly reliable. The natural impulse with neat stuff is sharing. Before my wedding, my guru brother gave me a neat rock he'd found, just because it was groovy, you know? I had it in my pocket when I vowed the rest of my lifetimes to my wife. It's simple, folks. All Jesus had to do was wait. And lo and behold, the kid was generous. And despite how Jesus could have acted, full of worry and striving, he sat down and blessed the food. Before our minds fill with Jesus elevating the kids' loaves and fish, let's remember that fascination with neat stuff is the core of blessing. For me, fascination with seeing energy shift and learning how to give it space is the core of Christian Tantra. It's the reason this stuff is available on social media. So Jesus sat down, was fascinated with stuff, and gave it to people. That's all. This only becomes remarkable because it's a context of massive scarcity, where the natural tendency is to do exactly what Jesus doesn't. As it turns out, if you can wait for the energy to shift, if you can learn how to support it, if you can avoid all the striving and worrying and angling that distracts from it, there will be enough to fulfill your needs. And here's why. The deepest need we have in a situation of scarcity is to guard fascinated and celebratory awe. If we manipulate to get our material needs met, we'll have all sorts of resentment, remorse, shame, and blaming to deal with. But remember, those too are sitting on the grass, and they'll shift just like everything else. There's a recent line of thinking that struck me, but seemed heavy. If you ask God for a Messiah, it says, He'll allow you to see what of the Messiah's work you can do yourself. If you ask God to give you generosity, He'll give you opportunities to be generous. If you ask God to give you strength, He'll put you in situations that require it. That's heavy. It seems like the learning through attrition common to crisis. What the teacher shows in the feeding of the 5,000 is how to sit down, be fascinated with neat stuff, even when that neat stuff is stress. Watch for things to change and share it. The Father loves the Son and shows him all that he himself is doing. And the adult son, who knows our needs better than we do, says, Wow, look at all this neat stuff, and gives it away. The action of the Spirit could be no clearer. In this case, go and do likewise is really just a request that we advocate for our own good. For me, right now, and maybe for everything in the cosmos, nothing at all is more important.